But there's so much more potential. And I'm happy to invite the next speaker up, Allison Miller, who is an associate professor in the Department of Biology at St. Louis University in St. Louis, Missouri. And she has a dual appointment, a research associate at the Missouri Botanical Garden. Allison studies plant evolutionary biology and population genomics. And she had a very exciting paper published this summer in the prestigious journal Nature Plants called Expanding the Role of Botanical Gardens in the Future of Food. I'd like to invite Allison Miller up to the stage.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can everybody hear me okay? As the mom of 2 young kids, I know how scary it is to be between people and their food. I'll try to keep this short so we can all get to lunch. Before I start, I want to just say thank you so much to Wes Jackson, to Tim Cruz, to Rachel Stroher, to Darlene, and to the Land Institute scientists and staff. This is such an honor and an exciting opportunity to be here. And I just can't say thank you enough. So, thanks. So, before I get started, I want to just give a brief introduction on my background. I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I always loved plants and spent a lot of time outside as a kid thinking about nature. My grandma, who I'm still very close to, grew up on a farm in central Illinois, and I was always really curious about her life and just farm life in general. But personally, to be honest, I knew very little about it. But I had this passion for plants, and I followed it when I went to college, where I studied botany during my undergraduate and master's degree program. And then I moved to St. Louis to begin to study evolution and ecology in the plant world. And so it was at that point that I really started to connect my love of plants with my kind of long interest in agriculture. And I guess before I get to describing this project, I just want to say that I think one of the major challenges associated with advancing food security in this changing climate is the challenge of broadening this conversation to include many people from many different backgrounds, including somebody like me from suburban Chicago. And this is clearly the MO of the Land Institute. I think if we look around, this is an organization that really reaches out to all different people from all different places. And I think this is great and critical. So a couple of years ago, I worked on a project an agriculture education project at the St. Louis Science Center. And the main theme of that project is that we all have a role to play in the future of our food, no matter where we come from. And so I'll just build on what Tiffany said. Let's think about what that is for each of us. Okay, so today I want to talk about this project that's really about building a botanical foundation for perennial polycultures. And the long-term goal of this project is to identify wild, perennial, herbaceous species that are good candidates for pre-breeding and for domestication. And we heard today that there are 2 major pathways of developing perennial crops, both of which are being pursued by the scientists here at the Land Institute. But as we look forward, we're trying to broaden that base of the diversity of plants that are involved in this process. So I'm going to share 3 themes with you today. The first one, all of which have to do with building this botanical foundation. The first is just to restate all of the food that we eat, all of the crops that we grow, and all of the crops that we're developing came from what were once wild plant populations. And the development of these crops, both historically and today, happened through this process of domestication. And I guess so the first message I want to say, and what we've just heard from the scientists here, is that as a species, we have domesticated plants before, and we can do it again, and we're doing it, and the scientists here at the Land Institute are doing it right now, and I think that's really super exciting. So I want to just give a quick primer on technically what domestication is. So basically, domestication is this evolutionary process that occurs as plant populations evolve in response to artificial selection. So early farmers selected individuals with desirable traits, larger seeds, or plants that didn't drop their seeds, plants that were easy to grow, whatever. And they used those selected individuals to found the next population of plants. And then they selected on that population and on the next. And over time, those cultivated populations evolved. This is domestication. And my background is really in studying this evolutionary process of domestication. And it's from that context that I first learned about the work of the Land Institute. So what I learned about domestication was that agriculture originated more than 10,000 years ago in different independent centers around the world, at least 7 and probably more. And in each of those regions, human societies independently selected a suite of wild plants and began cultivating them and domesticating them. And over time, that led to these major changes in genetics and morphology. So what's so amazing and intellectually exciting and just breathtaking about what's happening here at the Land Institute is that the scientists here are not studying the signatures of domestication that happened 10,000 years ago. They're actually doing the domesticating. And that is just something that I think we need to appreciate, that we have the capacity to do that and that it is happening here. I was here in December. The scientists who were up on stage took me through their data in a morning-long presentation, and it's really so exciting. So I just want to take a minute and express my respect for that work and share with you my enthusiasm for how this is happening. Okay, so we know that all of our crop plants originated from wild populations through domestication. We know that it's been done before and that it's happening now. So the next thing I want to talk about is how you actually go about developing a perennial crop. So early farming societies did not domesticate perennial herbaceous plants. David and Lee and Stan wrote a seminal paper in 2010 that was published in the journal Evolutionary Applications that described why there were no perennial herbaceous plants domesticated, and I don't think we know with certainty why that is. We just know it's not there. So what the Land Institute is focused on now is developing that hardware. So the next point that I want to make is that I believe that much of what we need to do the work of developing these new perennial herbaceous domesticates that can be included in perennial polycultures, much of what we need is available. We have developed resources in the botanical community and the scientific community in general, which I think are really, really useful. So I want to ask this question. If you want to proceed toward developing a perennial herbaceous crop, using either the process of hybridization, which we heard about today for several crops, or the process of de novo domestication, which we heard about from Lee and David, where do you start? So in nearly every agricultural center, at least one member of the grass family and at least one member of the legume family was domesticated, a carb source and a protein source. The Fertile Crescent, it was wheat and barley and then chickpeas and lentils. In Eastern Asia, it was rice and soybeans. In Central America, it was corn and common beans. So if we look to the grass family and the bean family as core parts of our agricultural history, we could start there, but the grass family has 10,000 species. The legume family has 20,000 species. The Asteraceae family, the daisy family, has 23,000 species. So this is a bit daunting. Okay, so the types of questions I'm interested in is how many wild grasses and legumes and Asteraceae species are there? So I just told you how many species there are in general, but how many of them are actually perennial? How are these species related to one another? Where are they distributed around the globe? How do they grow and what do their fruits look like? Are they edible? Are they toxic? Have they ever been used by people? The list goes on, but I'm here with really what I think is a very hopeful message, and that is that an entire community of scientists has been asking questions like these for centuries and have been documenting plant biodiversity all around the globe, not for the purposes of agriculture, but for the purposes of knowing the diversity on our planet. And I think we can leverage these resources to begin to advance the development of perennial grains and legumes, the work of the Land Institute. So to illustrate what I mean by resources, I want to share an example from my own work. So for my dissertation, I studied a Mesoamerican fruit tree. I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about this last night, which was really fun. The fruit tree I studied is Spondius purpurea. It's in the mango or pistachio or cashew or poison ivy family. And yes, I am very sensitive to that plant and that family, which is in part why I don't work with it anymore, to be honest. That is another story. So for my dissertation work, I was interested in the domestication history of this tree. I went throughout its native range from central Mexico, south through to Tuxtla Gutierrez and south, all the way through the Panama Canal, 6 countries in Central America. And I was collecting cultivated populations and wild populations. I was collecting leaves for genetic analyses, fruits, and ethnobotanical data. So this is just one project. And one of the products of my dissertation was that we collected, dried, pressed, and labeled specimens for 700 individuals. And we deposited them into a herbarium. A herbarium is just a collection of dried plants. Those specimens are in the Missouri Botanical Garden today. So you can go and look, and you can see exactly what I collected, where, and on what day. But I am one of thousands of people who does this type of crazy work. And herbaria have been collecting these specimens of plants that document all of this type of information for hundreds of years. The Missouri Botanical Garden has one of the largest herbaria in this country. It has over 6.3 million records now of plants. The New York Botanical Garden, Harvard University Herbaria, the Smithsonian are of similar size. Kew Botanical Garden in England, same thing. The exciting thing now is that all of the work of these botanical gardens, of these botanists that provide these detailed descriptions of plants, species identifications, distributions, uses, are all becoming data-based. And so 4 million of the 6.4 million specimens in the Missouri Botanical Garden are now accessible through a free online database that any of you can search right now from your phones. It's tropicos.org. And it links to all of the recorded specimens, not only at the Missouri Botanical Garden, but at these other botanical gardens as well. And so I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is that if we're thinking about going back to the wild, if we're looking at 10,000 species of wild grasses and 20,000 species of legumes and trying to figure out where to start, I think we can make use of this incredible record of plant biodiversity that the scientific community has been building. And so I guess the second major message that I just wanted to convey is that we have the resources that we need to at least get started. Okay, so I have one final thing I want to say. And just to kind of reiterate, you know, I'm a teacher, so I have to go over, I'm used to going over things again and again. So we've talked about how domestication is possible, and it's actually happening here at the Land Institute, and that it starts with wild plant populations. We've talked about how we have a big record of plant biodiversity that's in these botanical gardens that's now accessible online, where we can get information about species traits, and species uses. So the last thing I want to convey is that through partnerships, like the partnership between the Land Institute and St. Louis University and the Missouri Botanical Garden, we can bridge the botanical and agricultural research communities to establish really a botanical foundation for sustainable agriculture. We all have a role to play in the future of food, and that includes botanical gardens and natural history museums and other places where biodiversity has been cataloged. So over the past 10 months, we've established a partnership between these institutes that I just mentioned, and it has 4 main goals. I know I'm a little bit over, but I just want to take you through these because I think it's pretty exciting. Okay, so the first goal is that we're generating a checklist, a global checklist of perennial, herbaceous, shrubby grass, legume, and asteraceae species. So this is going to allow us to answer our question, how many perennials are there in nature in these families, and where do they grow? This list is going to be housed in an existing plant database, the Tropicos database that I mentioned, where it will link to specimens for each species. What this means is that individuals working anywhere in the world who are interested in perennial species and the development of perennial crops will be able to obtain the information that they want easily and without any type of barrier. So we'll have a list. Second, we're going to use our checklist as a foundation to develop a short list of candidate species. So we heard today from David and Lee and Shuen and Stan that there are a handful of crops that are being developed here, and the progress that's being made on those is really terrific. But what we want to do is to try to look forward a bit and see where it might go next. So we'll carefully evaluate traits related to yield, quality, ecophysiology, ease of cultivation, known prior food use and toxicity, access, and other topics. Initially, we're focusing on specific tribes within the families of interest, like the Triticii, that's the tribe that includes wheat, or the Helianthe, the tribe that includes sunflower. So this work involves combing existing literature, working through the herbarium, and synthesizing ethnobotanical data. And we're basically following the pipeline for domestication that's been laid out by Lee and David and others in this paper that they mentioned that's now in revision, I think, for the journal Crop Science. So that's the second objective. The third objective is that for the species that are on our prioritized list of candidates, we're going to be going out and collecting seeds from natural populations of those species or from existing seed banks like the Millennium Seed Bank in England or the USDA Center for Genetic Resources in Fort Collins, and transferring those seeds to the Land Institute. So just like David said, they want to cast their net wide and look at a broad range of species to figure out what to work with next. And so our job is to thoughtfully evaluate those taxa and actually physically get the seeds here. And the fourth and final goal is that we're going to plan and initiate a long-term experiment designed to develop and test theory related to evolutionary processes in perennial taxa. So we know a lot about how annual crops evolve. We know a lot about how woody crops evolve, but we're learning more, but we know relatively little about how perennial herbs are evolving. So our idea is to set up an experiment with annual and perennial congeners, plants in the same genus or close relatives, and select on them over the course of many years and monitor morphological and genetic changes. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up, what I was telling you about today is this building of a botanical foundation for perennial polyculture. I mentioned that domestication is ongoing and that we have the skills to do it. We've done it before, we'll do it again. We have much of what we need to get started with this project, building on the resources accumulated in the botanical community. And now that we have this terrific partnership that's been so generously supported by the Land Institute and their funders and St. Louis University and the Missouri Botanical Garden, we actually have the framework to begin to establish this long-term botanical foundation. So I'm thrilled to get started on this. I'll be here all day today and tomorrow, and I'd be delighted to take any questions. And with that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you very much.